In the heart of the mist-shrouded forest, where the trees whispered ancient secrets and the moonlight barely touched the moss-covered ground, the legend of the Headless Horseman was reborn. This wasn't the quaint tale of Sleepy Hollow, recounted by elders to wide-eyed children by the fireside. No, this was something darker, a story that bled into the edges of reality, leaving the small town of Graywood trembling in its wake. It began on a night when the fog was so thick it swallowed the streets whole, transforming familiar paths into winding labyrinths. The townspeople locked their doors, a ritual born of fear rather than tradition, as whispers of a headless figure on horseback began to circulate. But these were not mere rumors. The ground outside bore the marks of hooves, and the air carried the scent of decay. The first victim was found at the edge of the woods, his body so mutilated that identification became a task for the grieving rather than the forensic. It was said that the horseman had claimed his head as a trophy, a gruesome addition to a collection no one dared to imagine. The town was plunged into a state of panic, a collective breath held in anticipation of the next strike. As the body count rose, so did the sightings of the spectral horseman, each account more terrifying than the last. He was a phantom of vengeance, riding under the cloak of night, his presence heralded by the chilling sound of hooves on the forest floor and the ghostly wail of wine through the hollow where his head should have been. The authorities were powerless, their efforts to catch the horseman as futile as trying to grasp smoke. The more they searched, the more elusive he became, always one shadowy step ahead, leaving behind a trail of blood and despair. The town of Graywood was at the mercy of a legend reborn, a headless horseman who had transcended the bounds of story and stepped into the realm of nightmare. As the full moon rose, casting a silver glow over the forest, the townspeople huddled in their homes, wondering who would be next to fall prey to the horseman's wrath. The line between myth and reality blurred, leaving them to question not just their safety, but their sanity. The Headless Horseman was no longer just a tale, he was their reality, a violent specter of death riding through the night, unstoppable, insatiable, and terrifyingly real. In the weeks following the Headless Horseman's initial appearances, Graywood transformed from a peaceful town into a community on the brink of collapse. Each nightfall brought with it a palpable tension, as the townspeople waited, breaths held, for the inevitable sound of hooves against the earth. The horseman, a relentless phantom, seemed to revel in the terror he sowed, his midnight rides becoming more frequent and his targets more unpredictable. The local sheriff, a man of practicality and reason, found himself at a loss. His skepticism of the supernatural was challenged with each new victim, their bodies discovered at dawn, lifeless and headless, in a grotesque tableau that left even the most stoic of his deputies shaken. The sheriff organized patrols and set curfews, but the horseman moved like a wraith through their defenses, untouched and unseen until his grisly work was done. Among the townspeople, a young woman named Eliza emerged as an unexpected beacon of hope. Her brother had been one of the first victims, and in her grief, she found resolve. Eliza began to delve into the town's archives, uncovering long-forgotten lore about the horseman. According to legend, he was once a soldier wronged by the town's ancestors, decapitated in a brutal act of betrayal. His headless ghost was said to seek vengeance until he could rest in peace, his head returned to him or his betrayer's descendants made to pay. Eliza, with a small group of determined townsfolk, formed a plan. They would find the horseman's lost grave and attempt to appease his spirit. But as they set out into the night, guided only by the light of their lanterns and the thin crescent of the moon, they found themselves hunted. The horseman, aware of their intentions, became a predator of shadows, his spectral form galloping silently alongside them, his blade gleaming in the moonlight. The forest, once a place of beauty and solitude, became a nightmarish landscape. Trees seemed to close in around them, and the fog turned their surroundings into a disorienting maze. It was here, in the heart of the woods, that the horseman struck. Emerging from the mist, he charged, his horse's eyes ablaze with otherworldly fire. The group scattered, terror lending speed to their steps, but not all were quick enough. One of Eliza's companions, a young man named Thomas, was caught. The last thing he saw was the horseman looming over him, sword raised in a deadly arc, before darkness claimed him. Eliza and the remaining few found refuge in an old cabin, barricading themselves inside. Outside, the horseman circled, his eerie silence more terrifying than any sound. They realized then that their quest had only just begun. To stop the horseman, they would need to uncover the truth buried deep within Graywood's past and confront the darkness that had taken root in its heart. The night was long, and as they prepared to face what was to come, they understood the true nature of their foe. The Headless Horseman was not just a ghost, he was a manifestation of the town's sins, a violent reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to return. As dawn approached, the veil of night began to lift from the forest, but the darkness that enveloped Graywood's heart remained as impenetrable as ever. Eliza and her diminished group, having survived the night's terrors, knew that their confrontation with the Headless Horseman was inevitable. The knowledge they had gleaned from the town's archives led them to a forgotten graveyard, overgrown and hidden by the encroaching forest. It was here, they believed, that they would find the key to ending the horseman's reign of terror. The air was thick with mist and the scent of decay as they began their search, the first rays of sunlight casting long shadows between the tombstones. They were searching for a grave without a name, marked only by the symbol of a decapitated knight. As the sun rose higher, they found it, hidden beneath a tangle of thorns. Before they could begin to unearth the grave, a chilling silence fell upon the forest. The horseman had found them once more, his spectral form emerging from the mist, his presence a cold wind that threatened to extinguish the light of hope within them. This time, Eliza stepped forward, her resolve hardened by the losses they had suffered. She confronted the horseman, her voice steady despite the fear that clenched her heart. "We know your pain," she said, her words slicing through the silence. "We have uncovered the truth of your death, the betrayal that has bound you to this world. But this cycle of vengeance will only bring more suffering. Let us help you find peace." The horseman paused, his headless form seeming to consider her words. But then, with a terrible scream that echoed through the trees, he charged, his blade raised for a killing blow. The clash that followed was brutal and swift. Eliza and her companions fought with desperation, using every weapon and artifact they had gathered from the town's hidden caches, relics imbued with ancient magic meant to protect against dark spirits. The battle raged around the grave of the Headless Horseman, the ground becoming scarred by the forces unleashed. Eliza, realizing that violence alone would not end the curse, made a daring decision. She approached the open grave, her hands holding the horseman's skull, discovered amongst the town's relics, its eye sockets burning with a ghostly light. With a cry that mingled defiance with sorrow, Eliza placed the skull into the grave. A blinding light erupted, engulfing the horseman, his scream of rage turning into one of release. The ground shook, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished, and the horseman with it. The forest was silent once more, the mist beginning to dissipate. Eliza and her companions, battered but alive, looked around in disbelief. The curse of the Headless Horseman was broken, his spirit finally finding the peace that had eluded him in death. As they made their way back to Graywood, the sun breaking through the canopy above, they knew that their town would never be the same. They had confronted the darkness of their past and emerged victorious, but the cost had been high. The scars of the battle and the losses they had endured would not soon fade. Yet, there was hope. In their courage, the people of Graywood had found a newfound unity, a determination to rebuild and to honor the memories of those they had lost. The legend of the Headless Horseman would live on, not as a tale of terror, but as a reminder of the power of redemption and the strength found in facing one's fears. The end of the Headless Horseman's reign marked a new beginning for Graywood, a town no longer haunted by the specter of its sins, but illuminated by the dawn of a new day.